Anyway, I'm not going to tell you why I'm going first. It'll become apparent, I hope, as you hear our presentation, which is about a anthology of essays and science fiction stories called Touching the Face of the Cosmos, on the intersection of space travel and religion. And in fact, Lance has an essay in the book, and there are all kinds of interesting people who are in that book. I interviewed John Glenn this past July. He's about 95. That interview will be in the book. We have an essay by Guy Consolmagno, who is known colloquially as the Pope's astronomer. He actually was just officially appointed slightly before the Pope's visit as director of the Vatican Observatory. So it's gratifying that the church finally got it right after what they did to Galileo. So they're trying to make up for it now. But I got the idea for this anthology early in the 21st century when I was thinking about a book that was published in 2003 called Real Space: The Fate of Physical Presence in the Digital Age on and Off Planet. I go for short titles, as you might be able to tell. And I actually, if I'm not mistaken, spoke a few years ago at one of these meetings about what the main subject of that book was, which was the relationship of face-to-face, real-life interaction, the relationship of that to what we do online. And as some of you know, I'm the antithesis of a pessimist or a critic, and actually I think online life is great and it adds to our real life interaction. It does not subtract from it. It makes real life in-person interaction easier. Nor am I concerned that there is going to be any erosion of real life interaction. Because, for example, although you've heard a lot about JavaScript online, you still cannot send a cup of Java instantly through the web. You might be able to order it. You can probably order it on Amazon. You can order anything on Amazon, but someone has to physically deliver that coffee to you. So one of the main points of that book was that real-life interaction is not in any jeopardy. But something that is in jeopardy, and this is what led me to put together this anthology, is the human exploration of space. And in the early 21st century, it perhaps was in greater jeopardy than it is now, with what we're hearing about water on Mars, and I was just reading this morning about another commercial project that hopes to get uncrewed, that is CREWED, ships on a regular basis to the moon in the next couple of years. But even so, if you think about what we did in the late 1960s, human beings actually walked on the moon. And you think about all the promise that our space program had for us back then and how little we have come through on those potentials. There was certainly cause to be concerned a few years ago, and there still is now, that somehow, even though we got so far, we are not going to get much further. And although I'm an optimist, I can read history pretty clearly, and there are many cases of great technological advances, inventions in history, which seem to be on the verge of a revolutionary development, and then nothing much happened. For example, the Aztecs invented the wheel, but for a variety of reasons only used the wheel on toys. They didn't harness it as any kind of mass technology. And as I'm sure many of you know, the Chinese invented the printing press, but it was the Europeans who used the printing press to create the revolution in printed books and newspapers. And this was mostly because Chinese ideographic writing is not compatible with interchangeable type. In order to be thoroughly literate in Chinese, you have to master something like 20,000 different ideograms. And imagine running around a room trying to pull a little piece of type from here or there. It'll take you a year and a day just to set a page of print. In contrast to, we have 26 letters, capital and small, so it's a little over 50, and you add in punctuation, it's much easier. I used to work, by the way, in a print shop when I was a kid, so I know what it's like to set type in a world before we have computer and digital typesetting. So I was concerned that our leap into space could wind up like the Chinese printing press, or the Aztec use of the wheel, or what Heron invented in ancient Alexandria, all kinds of steam driven devices. And so no one built really workable steam engines. I see Lance is laughing about that because he knows that I'm so interested in Heron, I made him a character in my science fiction trilogy, The Plot to Save Socrates being the first novel. In any case, being concerned about this, I began thinking, well, what went wrong? You know, you need to identify what the problem is before you can fix it. What went wrong in our attempt to get out into space? Went wrong in terms of our not getting any further substantially than the moon in 1969 and then a few other flights into the 70s. And I began looking at the motives of space exploration, the overt motives that literally and figuratively drove us into space. So first and foremost, there was a military motive. The Nazis actually were the first to use rockets. Again, the Chinese invented rocketry. They used rockets also, but mostly for holiday, New Year celebrations. But the Nazis used the V-2 rocket, and it's been said that if they had been able to mobilize that a little earlier, they may well have won the war, because England had no defense against it. And they were planning even a Manhattan rocket and all kinds of things. And after World War II, as we know, both the US and the Soviets got into a competition. We each had our share of German rocket scientists. And so it was military competition that led the US, that first led John F. Kennedy to say, we'll get a man on the moon by the end of the decade, which we did. And not only that, but returned those people. But once that happened, the competitive edge was dulled and to some extent lost. So another motive became important, the scientific motive. This is like, the most ethically pure of the motives. Who could object to scientific knowledge, right? Clearly, it's obvious we can get more knowledge out there. Well, maybe in the 19th century, science was sexy and something that could get people really excited about doing things, but not in the 20th century. Science certainly is valuable, but it's lost something of its gleam. And then there was one more motive, the commercial motive, that is, make money. That actually is a very good motive. You can probably make a fortune out there if you can figure out how to get people back and forth, mine resources. And yet, those three motives led to stagnation. as far as our getting out into space. So I began thinking, is there an additional motive? And I began thinking, why do I find space so interesting? Why have I always wanted, I would go out there myself if they take me, but I'd probably fail to meet the qualifications. But why have I been interested all my life in human beings going out into space and seeing it as a crucially important thing for our species to do? It wasn't because of military advantage, because again, when you talk about species, that goes beyond military advantage. It wasn't for commercial reasons. I like money, but it's not the most motivating thing in my life by any means. I wouldn't be a professor if it was. Not that we're so poorly paid, but there are many better paying jobs. And science, again, yeah, I like knowledge, I'm interested. But I realized that the interest I had in space connected to something deeper. And in a nutshell, what that was my need, I think everyone's need, to understand a little more what we're doing here in this universe. Now, obviously, there's a scientific aspect to that as well. But science collects data, gives us information. We obviously learn a lot through science. I'm talking about something that's more a question of perspective. That will never get much beyond knowing what we now know, which is precious little about what we're doing here in this universe, from just being down here as a species and a civilization on this one planet, which science tells us and no one denies is just a little speck in this vast universe, and who knows what else is out there. And we'll never get much further than we are now if we think about that only from being down here on Earth. And I realize that although I am not a religious person, I'm barely observant of the holidays and customs of my own religion, Judaism. I would be the furthest person in the world from someone who would think that anything having to do with religion could be something that could be very important to something like space exploration, had I not come upon this through the thought process that I just described to you. But I realized that of all the things that we do here on Earth, all the institutions that we've developed, the ones that come closest to trying to address this question, in addition to science, which also does, but they are religions. And it doesn't matter whether we agree or disagree with the religious principles of this or that religion. I'm not really talking about that on that level of abstraction. I'm talking about it in a much broader level, which I think shows us, if you just even think about it, that what all religions try to do is answer the question, what are we doing here in this universe? What is life? What's intelligent life? And yes, they try in their ways to provide explanations, which I don't agree with for the most part. But that's indeed part of the problem. So many religions, so many explanations, that's led to conflict, even worse things than conflict, obviously. And it became clear to me that, first of all, in order for the space program to continue in a robust way, it has to connect to these religious impulses. And second of all, by doing that, we will finally begin to address from a better platform than just this planet, from just being down here, looking up at the sky, getting inspiration when we see the sky, when we look at the stars. All of those are profound activities. But until we actually get out into the stars, we are never going to get much further than we are now. So that's what I mean by religion as a necessary engine of space travel. I was at a conference, really wasn't a conference, it was a sort of just an event a few years ago out in Brooklyn, and organized by Tom Klinkostein, who may or may not have done some presentations here over the years. And on the panel with me was someone from Germany by the name of Michael Waltemathe. And of course, Germany has a tradition, as I mentioned, in space travel. And it turned out he is someone who teaches theology in Germany, and he is very interested in space travel and religion as well. So we were talking about putting on a conference, but early this year I decided, you know what, we can put on conferences, but let's get a book together. And that's how Touching the Face of the Cosmos was born. People tell me they like the title. To give credit where credit is due, you may recall Reagan's speech after the Challenger explosion. That was written by Peggy Noonan. It comes from a poem who was written, I think, in the 40s by a jet pilot who was talking about touching the face of God. So I freely give credit to that, but I substituted cosmos for God because, I mean, the two might well be the same, but this is on the intersection of space travel and religion, not just religion. And as I mentioned, we have a great, collection. I made a decision early on to have both essays and science fiction stories. We have award-winning science fiction authors. And in addition to Guy Consolmagno, we have an essay by Lance Strait, and he's going to talk about that in a minute or two. And one of the things that we hope to do is change the discourse about space travel by bringing religion into this discourse. And we'll just have to see to what extent that happens. The book, by the way, is going to be published early November as a Kindle edition by my own company, Connected Editions. But it's also going to be published in the spring as a paperback and a hardcover by Fordham University Press. So having read all the essays and stories, I can tell you it's going to be a fabulous book. All kinds of great stuff in there. So thank you for listening, and Lance will now probably tell you about his essay, which I'm looking forward to hearing. Thank you.